welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. Brazil has registered over 2,000 coronavirus-related deaths and more than 43,000 cases overnight. In Pakistan, the virus has claimed 40 more lives and infected over 1,000 people in the past 24 hours. Globally, there are 3.9 million deaths and more than 182 million cases. In Canada, nearly 500 people have died due to record-breaking heat over the last 5 days in British Columbia. The state's chief coroner, Lisa Lapointe, says the death toll could rise. Meanwhile, the U.S. state of Oregon has reported 63 deaths linked to the heat wave. Meanwhile, remains of 182 more Indigenous children have been found at a former boarding school in British Columbia. An Indigenous group, the Lower Couturier Band, says the children were aged between 7 and 15. This is the third such discovery in Canada in recent weeks. Myanmar's military rulers have announced the release of around 2,000 people from jails across the country. State media said the military has also dropped charges against celebrities who took part in anti-coup protests. The military has killed more than 880 civilians and detained more than 5,000 people since it seized power in February. Well, those were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now the news in detail. Brazil has registered over 2,000 coronavirus-related deaths and more than 43,000 cases overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.9 million lives and infected over 182 million people. More in this report.
Experts warn that the highly transmissible Delta variant is threatening progress made by the U.S. in fighting COVID-19. President Joe Biden has come up well short in his goal of delivering 80 million doses to the rest of the world by the end of June. Meanwhile, the Pan American Health Organization warns that the end of the pandemic is distant in most of Latin America and the Caribbean. In Brazil, far-right President Jair Bolsonaro said the Senate Commission investigating his conduct during the pandemic cannot touch him. But hundreds of Brazilians took to the streets to call for Bolsonaro's impeachment over what they call his genocidal pandemic policies.
That's $1 that Bolsonaro and the Ministry of Health wanted to earn on each vaccine bought, on the life of every Brazilian. We have more than 500,000 COVID-19 deaths in our country, and it is the result of the genocidal policy which revitalized the strength of coronavirus in our country.
Over in Asia, Thailand is reopening the holiday hotspot of Phuket to tourists quarantine-free, even as the country registered its highest daily death toll from COVID-19. Meanwhile, the Indonesian president has announced tougher social restrictions from July 3rd to 20th to stem a worrying spike. In Australia, significant numbers of new cases are being detected in New South Wales. The rising toll has raised fears of fresh clusters as the state reported a rise in new infections for a third straight day.
Yesterday at 8 p.m, New South Wales had 24 cases of local community transmission. Half of those were cases that were exposed in the community. A number of those cases were people who were conducting work in the last few days, some with symptoms, and we can't continue to have that happen.
The World Bank says it will up funding for COVID-19 vaccine purchases and deployment to $20 billion. South Korea has also unveiled a supplementary budget of over $29 billion to offer pandemic relief to households, aid small businesses and create jobs.
In Pakistan, 40 more people have lost their lives to the COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. The health ministry says the death toll has crossed 22,000. The ministry said more than 1,000 people tested positive for the virus overnight. It said the caseload has exceeded 958,000, while over 904,000 have recovered. There are nearly 32,000 active cases in the country, of which over 1,800 are critical. Meanwhile, nearly 160 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine have been administered. Health Ministry data shows that more than 3 million people have been fully vaccinated. Pakistan has once again cautioned against spoilers of peace in Afghanistan that aim to harm regional stability. Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa said this during his visit to the National Defence University in Islamabad. The military's media wing, ISPR, said Bajwa called for a peaceful solution to the Kashmir issue as per the UN resolutions. He also underscored the need for continuous evaluation of the doctrine to deal with evolving threats. The Army Chief added that advanced technologies are important to maintain a qualitative edge over adversaries. General Bajwa said those forces that wish to undermine the bond between armed forces and the nation are bound to fail. In Canada, nearly 500 people have died due to record-breaking heat over the last 5 days in British Columbia. The state's chief coroner, Lisa Lapointe, says the death toll will rise. British Columbia's Lytton town this week broke Canada's hottest temperature record 3 times. It now stands at 49.6 degrees Celsius. In the U.S. Northwest, temperatures in Washington and Oregon soared well above 38 degrees Celsius over the weekend. Portland set all-time highs several days in a row, reaching 47 degrees Celsius. Oregon has reported 63 deaths linked to the heat wave. Governor Kate Brown declared a state of emergency due to the imminent threat of wildfires, while the U.S. National Weather Service in Portland issued a red flag warning for parts of the state. The agency says wind conditions could spread far quickly should one start. In Canada, remains of 182 more Indigenous children have been found at a former boarding school in British Columbia. This is the third such discovery in Canada in recent weeks. An Indigenous group, the Lower Cotooneh Band, says the children were aged between 7 and 15. The group said it is believed the remains belong to bands of the Katmusacha Nation and other First Nation peoples. The Lower Cotooneh Band says it is too early to decide if these were former students of the school. Indigenous leaders said they believe more graves will be found as investigations into the sites of these schools continue. China's President Xi Jinping has warned against anyone trying to oppress or bully his country. She addressed a ceremony to mark 100 years of the Chinese Communist Party. Celebrations at Tiananmen Square saw massive crowds with military jet flypast, cannon salutes and patriotic songs. The Chinese president said Beijing has never oppressed another country, nor will it ever do so. He pledged to complete the reunification with Taiwan and to smash any attempts at formal independence for the island. She highlighted the role of the party in modern China and a central role in the country's growth.
100年前
100 years ago, the pioneers of communism in China established the Communist Party of China and developed the great founding spirit of the party, which is comprised of the following principles: upholding truth and ideals, staying true to our original aspiration, take on the historical mission, fighting bravely without fear of sacrifice, and remaining loyal to the party and faithful to the people. This spirit is the party's source of strength.
In Ethiopia, rebels claim they forced the government troops to leave Tigray's capital, Mekelle. Earlier, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said troops left the city because it was no longer the center of gravity for conflicts. A spokesperson for the Tigray People's Liberation Front termed Ahmed's comment a lie. He said the TPLF fighters bested security forces in what they called their own game. The spokesperson also said government-allied Eritrean troops have not withdrawn from the region. Earlier, a government official said the troops could return to Mekelle in weeks if needed. He also said Eritrean forces, which have been accused of abuses against civilians, had withdrawn from the region. Abiy's government has been battling the rebels since last year. The UN says at least 350,000 people are facing famine and 5 million others need to immediate food aid in the restive region. Turkey says it is talking to Russia on the extension of a cross-border aid operation into war-torn Syria. Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu says the mandate must be extended beyond July 10th when it expires. Cavusoglu and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov held a press conference in Antalya. Turkish minister said Ankara will continue to work with Moscow on a political solution to the Syrian crisis. He added the two will also coordinate on maintenance of an existing ceasefire in the north. For his part, Lavrov criticized the Syria Civilian Protection Act signed in 2020 by the U.S. President Donald Trump, he said the illegal seizure of Syrian assets and foreign banks at the request of Washington is a total robbery. The Caesar Act contains the toughest sanctions ever against Syrian president in a bid to force him back to talks to end the country's war. Millions of people depend on the humanitarian aid funneled from a single border crossing between Turkey and northwest Syria. Myanmar's military has announced the release of around 2,000 people from jails across the country. The state media said charges against actors and other celebrities who took part in the anti-coup pretext will be dropped. In April, the military rulers ordered the release of more than 23,000 prisoners from jails across the country under a New Year amnesty. Since taking power in February, the military has struggled to govern in the face of daily protests and strikes. A riot script says the military has detained over 5,200 people and killed at least 883 civilians. In the U.S., the death toll from a residential building collapse near Miami has risen to 18. 6 more bodies, including 2 children, were found overnight in the shattered ruins of the tower. The mayor of Miami-Dade County, Daniela Levine Cava, said 147 people are still unaccounted for. Cava added that she would convene a grand jury to examine building safety. Nobody has been pulled alive from the debris since the condo came down on June 24th. Officials say they still hope to find survivors.
I've been a trauma surgeon for around 11 years, and this has been emotionally the most difficult thing I ever had to endure. I think a lot of us, including myself, a lot of our task force members who I work with are separated from these missing people by only 1 or 2 degrees.
More news stories coming up after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. In Sudan, hundreds took to the streets to demand the transitional government's resignation over economic reforms. The reforms, backed by the International Monetary Fund, slashed subsidies on petrol and diesel, more than doubling their price. Protesters amassed outside the presidential palace in Khartoum and rejected the IMF-led policies. Earlier, the IMF approved a $2.5 billion loan and debt relief deal with Sudan. Meanwhile, Sudanese authorities said they arrested around 200 members of the former ruling party. Officials accuse them of plotting acts of destruction. A tiger park in Thailand's Phuket is set to open its doors again for overseas tourists. They will be given a green light to travel elsewhere in Thailand after 14 days. More in this report.
The Tiger Kingdom's parks, more than 90% staff has been vaccinated against coronavirus ahead of the arrival of foreign tourists. The park, with more than 50 tigers and cheetahs, used to welcome more than 1,000 visitors a day before the pandemic struck.
We have prepared with many precautionary procedures to create confidence for incoming tourists. We have vaccinated more than 90% of our staff. We received Thailand Safety and Health Administration Plus certificate. We have also practiced a routine to clean all surfaces that can be touched every 30 minutes and will also provide alcohol-based hand sanitizer. We have trained the staff about tourism in the new normal.
The government hopes that the scheme will draw 129,000 visitors to the country in the third quarter. There was an average of 3.3 million monthly arrivals to Thailand in 2019.
ก็รู้สึกดีใจครับที่แบบ
I'm happy that finally there will be people visiting the Tigers and Phuket city will be bustling again. Incoming tourists will help with the mental health of both the Tigers and the staff.
The country lost about $50 billion revenue last year. Foreign arrivals plunged to 6.7 million from a record 39.9 million in 2019. Phuket was particularly hard hit by job losses and business closures due to the coronavirus pandemic.
A hotel for pets, the first of its kind, has opened in the West Bank. Located in the town of Bisay, the Pet Palace offers accommodation, grooming and pet supplies. More on this report.
George Gaddis has fulfilled his dream by opening a hotel for pets in the West Bank. He says there is a need for such a service as it offers pet owners a solution when they travel.
I've raised dogs and pets throughout all of my life. I've had most types of pets and I always had trouble finding a place to keep my dogs when I travel, or if I want to bathe them, take them to play, groom them, or take them anywhere. There is no place in this country that provides these services. I've traveled a lot and saw many similar places abroad, and that is how I got the idea.
Although the project was seen as silly by Gaddis' family and friends, but he was not dissuaded and was convinced that the hotel will fill in a much-needed service gap.
It is a great adventure. When I first informed my family and friends that I intend to open a hotel for dogs, they made fun of me and would tell me that this is silly. But honestly, I was surprised. Well, not very surprised, since I expected it. But those around me were surprised by the excellent turnout to the hotel since it was established.
The Pet Palace only serves a limited portion of the Palestinian pet owners as its services are seen as instrumental.
This is a very important, convenient and nice project that provides a safe place for pets, especially that a lot of people have to run errands and need a place to put the dog or want to travel.
Gaddis says he is satisfied with the turnout of the hotel and aspires to extend the project to care for stray dogs.
A Pakistani origin girl, Mashal Amir, has bagged the Diana Award from Britain for her humanitarian services. Mashal, who hails from the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, was bestowed with the award at a virtual ceremony. The Glasgow University graduate is among the 300 inspirational youths who were awarded the highest accolade for social action. In Pakistan, Mashal played a key role for the betterment of students of the Army Public School, Peshawar, following a deadly terrorist attack in 2014. The United Kingdom is introducing new regulations to help defend its steel industry. This follows a recommendation from the newly established Trade Remedies Authority to scrap some quotas on imports. Trade Minister Liz Truss says London only had the option of accepting or rejecting their recommendations in full. She said quotas and tariffs will be retained for 10 categories of steel for 3 years and revoked in 9 others. But Truss said imports outside the quotas will face a tariff of 25%. The European Union introduced quotas in 2019 when Britain was still in the bloc. It was a bid to guard against steel shipments normally destined for the US being redirected to Europe. Most stocks in Asia Pacific are trading slightly lower as investors react to the release of Chinese economic data. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index and ASX 200 in Australia have shed over 0.5%. Seoul's Kospi slipped nearly 0.5%, while Japan's Nikkei 225 has also edged down. However, mainland Chinese shares have edged up marginally. Now it's time to have a look at the weather update across the globe. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.